We are not meeting in person, and we're here, so it's good to see your faces. I've asked, before we get started and kick things off, I've asked Mr. Connolly to open us up with a prayer today. Mr. Michael Connolly, would you please start us off?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hauka, Namit Menuwe. Maiha, Creator, thank you for this opportunity to come together. Help us, guide us to make good decisions. Help us to help our people, to help us in the efforts that we're undertaking. Help us to have a clear vision of what it is that we're undertaking. Help us to respect the views of other people that we're working with. Thank you for the opportunity. Look out for the people in our communities that are suffering now. Had many deaths recently. We have many issues in our communities with substance abuse and violence. Help us to overcome these issues and create a better life for ourselves and for others.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. So the clerk did confirm we have a quorum, and I'd like to review the process for both the working group and also members of the public who wish to speak under the public comment. So for the working group members, when you'd like to speak, please click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom control panel. You have control of your video and your mute, so please turn off your camera or turn on your camera when you'd like to speak, and I'll call on you. If you are representing your tribe today, please rename yourself, adding the abbreviated name of your tribe to the Zoom label so we can more easily call for the roll for voting. Any questions before we continue? No, Avelia, can you provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work?
As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailed comments, the public also may provide live comments during today's meeting. To provide a live verbal comment during the meeting, please join the Zoom meeting either by computer or phone. At the time of public comments, members of the public are advised to raise hand. If you wish to provide comments, the raise hand feature can be found on the Zoom toolbar for those who are joining via computer or by entering *9. For those joining via telephone only, the chair will call on members of the public by name of those joining via computer and by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. For those joining via telephone, all comments received prior to the close of the meeting will be made part of the meeting record. The instructions for providing live comments also are on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. Comments made in the chat are not considered public comments, so please state your comments out loud.
Thank you very much. So at this time, I'd like to take the opportunity for our tribal working group members to introduce themselves and the tribal nation they represent, as well as the public agency advisory members. So the public joining us today are aware of who's on our meeting today. Who would like to start with the introductions? Do you have a order that you'd like to start in? Anybody, please introduce yourselves and who you represent.
I'll go.
Thank you, Shasta.
This is Shasta Gahn. I am the Environmental Director and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Paul Abandoned Mission Indians.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, this is Ray Welch, Chairman for the Paul Abandoned Mission Indians.
Chairman.
Good morning, everyone. This is Andrew Roscoe, the Planning Director for San Pasqual Band and Mission Indians.
Hi, Shayla Alvarez, Government Affairs for Verona.
That's a voice I haven't heard in a long time. Hi, Shayla. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Chairwoman. This is Lisa Hawes, Tribal Administrator and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Manzanita Band.
Hi, Lisa.
If you can hear me, this is Ray Turan, Resource Management Director for Viejas Tribal Government.
Loud and clear, Ray. Good morning. Anybody else like to introduce themselves?
Hello, this is Chris Neho with the Paula Band of Mission Indians, listening in for Chairman Smith.
Morning, Chris.
Michael Conley, I'm the consultant with Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association.
Good morning, everyone. This is Richard Chen. I'm with the County of San Diego.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Crispin. I'm also with the County of San Diego and am the interim tribal liaison.
Morning, Scott.
Hi, my name's Rafael Reyes. I'm the Native American liaison for Caltrans District 11.
Morning, Rafael. Anybody else?
I'm Jane Clough. I'm the tribal liaison for Sandag and coordinating the working group.
Wonderful. Okay. I think we'll move right along. Thank you again for being here today. We'll go to item number 2, which is the member public comments. Members of the public shall have the opportunity to address the working group on any issue within the jurisdiction of Sandag that is not on this agenda. Do we have any public comments? Do you see any hands raised, Evelia?
I don't see any hands raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Thank you so much. Any working group members would like to offer any comments or questions, please turn on your camera and raise your hand at this time. Any working group members? Nope. Okay. So we'll continue on down to item number 3, which is the approval of the last meeting minutes of June 30th, 2021. Hopefully everybody has had the opportunity to review the meeting minutes of our last technical working group. When you feel so inclined and feel comfortable to approve, I'd entertain a motion to approve those meeting minutes, please.
I'll make that motion. This is Shasta.
Thank you, Shasta. So there's a motion by Paula to approve the June 30th, 2021 meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
Second, Viejas.
Thank you, Viejas. So there's a motion by Paula, seconded by Viejas to approve the last set of meeting minutes from June 30th, 2021. Jane, do we do a roll call for this? Yes?
Sorry, yes, Chairwoman. Avelia will do the roll call.
Okay, Avelia, please.
Humboldt,
Aye.
Verona,
Aye.
Campo, Pais, Santa Isabel, La Jolla, La Costa, Paula,
Aye.
Palma, Rincon, San Pascual,
Aye.
Saquon,
And Manzanita.
Viejas,
Did I hear Viejas?
yes.
Aye.
And Manzanita Villa.
Manzanita abstains. Thank you.
One, two, three, four, five. Five in favor. Motion carries. Okay, at this time, so after every item on the agenda, we have to take public comment and working group comments. So are there any working group members who have any comments or questions?
I don't see any hands raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Thank you, Ms. Castellanos. How about any public comments at this time? We'll take them now.
I don't see any. Don't see any hands raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Okay, so then we'll move right along to item number 4, which is the chair's report, and I'll keep it very brief and only a few things to really update on. Rafael, if I may talk about our discussion that we had about the highways under Caltrans jurisdiction that you and I had a conversation about. I think that's a really awesome project that's coming up, and to be thinking about for your communities, Highway 94, Highway 8, Highway 163, 76 up in Paula area. If there are any open spaces or open walls that tribal people feel, could put some art, some Luceño art, some Kumeyaay art, I think this is a very exciting project that would beautify the roads. And it reminds me of something like in Arizona or Las Vegas, if you ever drive the 5 or the 8 freeway out that way, or the 15, excuse me. They're really beautiful. And this is a conversation that I remember having with Tokes, Director Tokes Amashaken. And it's coming to fruition. And Rafael and I had a discussion a few weeks back to just get people thinking, and with the community, the tribal community, be on board for this. And I think we did get a lot of people who are on board and excited for this. I did raise this at the Tribal Chair Association. And so I look forward to working with Caltrans, and I don't know who's going to do the art, but I think it's going to be a beautiful thing, Rafael. So thank you for bringing this up. Do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Chairwoman. So the kind of the important dates right now are October 15th, which is a deadline for us to prepare kind of a draft proposal, and we would need a proposed location, and then the actual scope of the I guess art installation, quote unquote, doesn't have to be completely defined. So we basically just have to identify location and specify that it will be a beautification project. So it can be anything from a mural to some artwork that can be fixed onto that vertical surface, and really it's up to I guess the imagination, right, of what can go out there. And so that's what I would request right now, is to if there are any locations that anybody on the call is thinks would be a good place for something like this, please reach out to me. Like I said, I'd like to get all that information in by the October 15th, and then we can continue the discussion as far as what that scope will be, and obviously have the input of the tribes for what that will ultimately look like.
Well done, Rafael. I appreciate that. I can't wait to see the outcomes. Moving on the report, a grant opportunity with the Economic Development Administration was brought to the SCTCA board meeting this past Tuesday. And we approved putting together a collaborative grant that would focus on the development of green infrastructure network in Indian country. This is a great green economic opportunity, and I'm excited to see where this may take us. And as you all also may know, the last Friday in September was California American Indian Day. So that passed us, and happy California American Indian Day to all. The California Tribal Chair Association met in Sacramento the day before, which was September 23rd. And we discussed a lot of environmental issues that are going up and down the state of California, including redwoods that are being destroyed and cut down, including the blue-green algae up in the Yurok territory, Yurok-Karuk territory, and other environmental issues that came up. But California Tribal Chair Association is the majority of the California tribes. There's 109 tribes who are part of this discussion in this meeting. So that was a very good meeting we had last week, I think it was. Time seems to be going by so fast. So that's all I have for the, NAC. We have a NAC meeting on November 3rd, excuse me. November 3rd, the Native American Advisory to Caltrans. November 3rd is our next meeting. And I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, I don't know if you know this, but are we open right now? Is this the time to submit people who want to be a part of the NAC? Do you know?
I do not know. Rafael, do you know if they're doing a call right now for new members?
I better touch base with Lenora Graves on this today. So November 3rd is coming up around the corner.
And is it a virtual? I'm assuming it's a virtual meeting?
It's a virtual meeting, correct? Yeah. So I look forward to seeing you all at the NAC as well. And that concludes my chair's report. Comments or questions from the working group or the public? Ms. Castellanos, anything?
I don't see any hands raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Okay, I appreciate it. So then we'll move right along to item number 5.
There is a member of the working group that's raised their hand. It might be Ray.
Ray?
I can see the hand, but I can't see whose it is. Shasta.
Shasta.
Thank you. And actually, it's Ray had put a question in the chat as well. So that's going to be similar to my question about where the art for the beautification project can go, because I can think of lots of places, but I want to know what the parameters are. Like, does it need to be, on the sidewall of a bridge or an existing sound wall, sound barrier, or what?
Yeah, it's I'm sorry to interrupt. I can answer that. So it's really open at this point. We're thinking of staying away from existing surfaces that are already have an architectural treatment. Like sometimes there's like when, let's say, a retaining wall is cast or poured, the false work will have some kind of design on it. And so if it already has some kind of design, we'll those are the locations we probably we'll stay away. We're looking more for locations that don't have anything, that are more just like traditional flat surfaces. But yeah, and it can be anywhere on a state highway or freeway. So any one of the state routes. And then, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Did that answer your question too, Ray?
Yes, but the only comment I'd say is that if we're only going on new construction, it seems like there's not a lot of opportunity to put something out there.
Yeah, the project or these projects are being funded out of the Clean California grant program. And it's specifically for existing locations, the beautification projects. And I guess when I say existing locations, I mean like if there's already an existing retaining wall or structure, those will be the ideal locations. If there's an idea for like just a sculpture, let's say, or something like that, that's a possibility, but there are guidelines from our traffic operations safety side that we can't have things that close to the roadway. So that's why the idea would be to have something on a surface that is existing because it's already kind of been vetted for clear recovery zone distances and safety. And because of our short timeline too, that's kind of like the low hanging fruit. But if there's, I know we've been looking at definitely a location like coming into San Diego from San Isidro on the 5, and then another location on the 15, and then I think there's one more location that was identified on the 5 too, but a little farther north. And the idea here, I guess, would be to bring more awareness to people traveling on the 5 that may not necessarily go out to the areas where the reservations are at, to so that they can know that there is a presence here, from the tribes that have been here for centuries. Because I think that's one of the things, at least I know within Caltrans, it's always a surprise, to hear how many people don't realize the history we have here with the tribes.
Well, we'd like to look at all the possibilities along Interstate 8 because after all, it's got the title of the Kumeyaay Highway, and it'd be nice to be able to find some opportunities to put some of our native art or cultural displays on whatever might be available out there.
Sure. And we can talk offline if anybody is interested also, kind of one-on-one to discuss further. I'm available for that, so feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Rafael. It's exciting. So, okay. Item number 5, the 2021 draft regional digital equity strategy is on consent for information only. SCTC has been participating in the Regional Digital Divide Task Force to provide a tribal voice on this issue. There's a link to the draft strategy in your agenda packet. Staff is asking for comments and suggestions to the draft. So please take a look at that. Going on to item number 6, are any public comments or any technical working group committee members have questions on this?
I don't see any hands raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Castellanos. Then we're on to item number 6. Kirsten is going to give this report. It's the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, for the 2021 regional. Was released last month, and SANDAG is seeking public comments through October 11th. Kirsten is going to provide an overview of the 2021 regional plan EIR. We need to clarify that according to the rules surrounding the EIR process, staff cannot answer questions at this time. If you have comments, you will need to submit them in writing through various venues that Kirsten will describe. Kirsten.
Good morning, Chair Pinto and working group members. My name is Kirsten Yucatel, and I am here to give you a brief overview of the EIR and the several ways of participating in the EIR comment process. The draft EIR was completed and sent out for a 45-day public review on August 27th, so just some weeks ago. The comment period, as Chair Pinto mentioned, is open until October 11th. Next slide, please. The draft EIR and the 15 supporting technical appendices can all be found on SANDAG's SD Forward website. You can read or download the entire document or individual sections, Hard copies are also available for review at the Central Library and Sandag's downtown offices. Comments can be submitted in writing via email or a letter through the website tool at San Diego at SD Forward. We hope you'll submit comments. Comments are being accepted until the 11th. Written responses to all comments received between now and the 11th of October will be included in the final version of the EIR. Next slide, please. Under the California Environmental Quality Act, the EIR is required to identify and evaluate physical impacts to the environment resulting from the 2021 Draft Regional Plan and to identify mitigation measures to reduce any of those impacts. The draft EIR is considered a program EIR, and as a result, details on the magnitude and extent of many impacts are not yet known, and subsequent project-level environmental review under CEQA will be required. The EIR is primarily a public disclosure document intended to inform the public and to solicit public input, suggestions, comments. The final EIR will go to the Sandag board for certification as one piece of their decision-making on the 2021 regional plan, and that is expected in December 10th of this year. Next slide, please. The draft EIR covers 19 different resource areas, which are shown on this slide. Each resource area has one or more criteria for determining the significance of environmental impacts according to CEQA. And each of these sections in the EIR lays out those criteria and where there are impacts, what mitigation measures have been proposed to mitigate them, and how effective that mitigation is. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all 19 sections, but I am going to highlight the discussion for tribal cultural resources. This is the significance criteria used in the EIR to analyze potential impacts to tribal cultural resources and to develop the mitigation measures. Again, because it's a program level analysis, the mitigation measures are not specific and don't require the specifics of implementation and protocols that would be required at a project level. For tribal cultural resources, the EIR provides a mitigation framework to be utilized for future analysis. This framework incorporates the language developed by the tribal working group over several months in 2020 and 2021. Next slide, please. This is the language of the mitigation framework to be used when project level mitigation is developed. Mitigation is implemented primarily through advanced research of potential impacts, consultation, and development of project level protocols to avoid or reduce impacts to tribal cultural resources. So I said before that the EIR includes determinations as to whether there are impacts and whether those impacts are significant under CEQA and whether they can be mitigated to below a level of significance. I want to clarify that for the EIR, where Sandag does not exclusively control implementation of mitigation, where other jurisdictions are involved, we find legally that the impacts are significant and unavoidable, not necessarily because the impacts are inevitable, but because we cannot, and Sandag's board cannot ensure implementation because we don't have exclusive jurisdiction. This is the case for tribal cultural resources, where mitigation would require implementation by agencies or jurisdictions beyond just Sandag. So in the EIR, impacts to tribal cultural resources are determined to be significant and unavoidable. Next slide, please. Another aspect of the EIR that I'm just going to briefly give an overview of are alternatives. CEQA does require that an EIR look at a reasonable range of alternatives that reduce environmental impacts while meeting project objectives. Alternatives are expected to provide context for the plan that is being proposed by analyzing other possible land use patterns, transportation networks, and pricing and policies, and providing more context for the public to offer comment. For this EIR, we considered 3 alternatives to the 2021 regional plan. The first alternative was the no project alternative, which is required under CEQA. Under this alternative, only projects with environmental clearance, with full funding, already under construction, or otherwise reasonably foreseeable based on the current plan would proceed. Under this alternative, Sandag would fall out of compliance with the requirements for state and federal funding, and so future building would not occur. Specifically, Sandag would be out of compliance on January 1st, 2022 for state funding and October 25th, 2023 for federal funding. The second alternative was based on the 2019 RTP and land use pattern, as well as the adopted general plans of the 18 cities and county. New pricing and user fees similar to those found in the 2021 plan were included where compatible. Many of the innovations in the 2021 regional plan are not compatible. So for example, there are no mobility hubs in alternative 2 due to that lack of compatibility, and the same with some pricing programs. Lastly, the third alternative went further than the 2021 regional plan in an effort to maximize GHG and VMT reductions. This alternative would limit future development and growth to mobility hubs and includes increased pricing and user fees beyond those in the 2021 plan. Because of its success in minimizing environmental impacts, alternative 3 for CEQA purposes is considered the environmentally superior alternative. All of those alternatives are included in Chapter 6 of the EIR with a chart that also has a comparison of impacts. So if you are interested in seeing those and using those as a means of evaluating the regional plan and commenting, please look on the SD Forward website and you can download just that chapter. In closing, I want to remind you of the public comment closing date, which is October 11th. And again, you can go to SD Forward and you can use the comment tool. There are other instructions on the website for submitting comments in writing, via email, or even over voicemail. And the final EIR, again, will go to the Board of Directors prior to adoption of the 2021 regional plan, including responses to all of the comments that we received during the public comment period. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this overview. And I hope that you will go to the website and comment on the EIR.
Thank you, Kirsten. Any public comments or tribal member comments? Turn on your camera, raise your hand. Shasta, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten, very much. That's a great overview. I am considering my comments on Paula's behalf right now as the TIPO for the impacts to tribal cultural resources. So I very much appreciate that explanation you gave about why the EIR finds that the impacts are, unavoidable. And so I would just offer a suggestion, even though I know it's a little bit late in the game at this point, that's a piece of information that could be useful for tribes who are developing their comments. Because otherwise, I know that for me to see something like unavoidable and unmitigable makes all my hair stand on end. But also having done this long enough to realize that this is a policy document and not a project document, it does make a difference. But that might be a piece of information that would be useful for the tribes to have so that they understand how that conclusion was reached rather than come to the erroneous conclusion that it means tribal cultural resources will be destroyed.
I completely agree. I should have added that there is some discussion of that in the environmental setting and environmental impact analysis sections earlier on in the EIR and following the project description. But yes, not everyone would think to look there. But there is a fuller explanation if you would like to read it in context of the EIR in those sections.
It would be great if I could, maybe you could put in the chat or it could be emailed out, like exactly which section has that fuller discussion. And then I can push it out to my contacts and colleagues who are TIPOs and cultural resource staff to also let them know. I heard it straight from Sandag. Here's what this means. Don't freak out.
I would be happy to work with Jane to give her the right section to be sure that gets out to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shasta. Any other hands raised, Ms. Castellanos?
I don't see any other hand raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Thank you. Okay. What about the public? Any public hands? There's no public hands either?
No, I don't see a hand raised in the public section, Chairwoman Pinto.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead. Thank you, Kirsten. So we'll go on to item number 7, which is the San Vicente Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan. We have Molina Pereira who will give us an update on the progress of San Vicente CMCP. Please take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Melina Pereira, and I am the Caltrans Project Manager for the San Vicente Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, or CMCP. On behalf of the project team, I would like to thank you for giving us your time this morning as we go over the draft project inventory for this corridor. Next slide, please. So the CMCP is a joint effort between SANDAG and Caltrans. Rachel Kennedy from SANDAG is our corridor planning manager. I am the project manager. Victor is our Caltrans acting corridor director. From our consultant team, we have Amy Jackson as the project manager for the CMCP. And we also have the 67 PNED, or the Highway Improvement Project, that is being led by Marvin Canton from Caltrans. Next slide. As a brief orientation to the corridor, this slide presents the study area and the area of influence for the corridor plan. The study area, represented by the slightly darker color on this map, is the focus of our proposed transportation solutions, and the draft project inventory that we will be presenting today will fall within this area. The surrounding lighter color on the map is the area of influence and represents the area that will likely be impacted by proposed improvements. Next slide, please. You can go ahead and click the first one. So in addition to the San Vicente corridor project, there are other parallel efforts surrounding the study area that you may or may not be aware of. Next click, please. The PNED effort will focus most heavily on enhancing operations and will improve the safe and efficient movement of people and goods using various modes of travel during both typical highway operations and during emergencies such as wildfires. Project objectives also include encouraging active transportation, providing multimodal options such as bike paths and or lanes where feasible, facilitating recreational and wildlife movement along and across the route, and preserving human and natural environment along 67. So the PNED effort will help advance the San Vicente corridor plan, high-level concepts within the PNED project limits to the feasibility phase, design, and implementation in the short term, which will help the corridor compete for transportation project funding in the San Diego region. Next click. The 67 pavement rehabilitation project is another corridor effort which proposes to repair and improve the overall ride quality on 18.4 miles of traveled way and shoulders on 67 from just north of the San Diego River Bridge in Lakeside to SR 78 and 10th Street in Ramona. There is an ongoing pavement rehabilitation project that will include micro trenching for fiber optic telecommunications from Lakeside to Highland Dye intersection. The conduit installed for this project will also allow space for future deployment of broadband. SANDAG, Caltrans, and the county are seeking to partner with the broadband providers and or other entities that may be interested in leveraging the installation of fiber infrastructure. The CMCP proposes a project that would be bundled with other proposed CMCP projects that would continue that infrastructure further east through Ramona in order to be prepared for future broadband deployment. Next click, please. The Interregional Tribal Transportation Strategy Update is an additional ongoing project. The corridor plan team is aware of this project, and the recommendations and projects from the ITTS are being incorporated into the CMCP, and an update on that effort will be given to you today. I will now pass it off to Amy Jackson to give us an update on the San Vicente corridor plan, where we are in the process, and what are the next steps, and what we are looking for from you in terms of feedback. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Melina. If we could go to the next slide. Perfect. So this slide shows you an overview of where we are in the CMCP process. The first section on the left basically highlights where we were last time we met with this group. So at that point, we were collecting a lot of feedback from subject matter experts and other stakeholders, trying to identify what the needs are for this corridor. The next section, if you could click, actually, I think there's a little bit of animation. Yeah, next one, please. Perfect. This next section is what we've been working on since we last saw you. So we've been taking all that feedback and creating basically a comprehensive wish list of potential projects for the corridor in response to the needs that were identified. And now today, where we are is basically looking for feedback from all of our stakeholders on that project inventory list to make sure that these are projects that have merit for continuing forward. We'll be continuing to evolve that list of projects, reviewing them by feasibility against our performance measures, coming up with cost estimates and creating project bundling in the future. And then basically any of those projects that pass all of these tests will become the projects that are retained in the final CMCP document. The next slide shows you the 7 high-level needs that have been identified for this corridor. And again, this is based on feedback from public input, stakeholder working groups, and subject matter experts, as well as the project team. So as you'll see here, we've heard that evacuation, utility resilience, information accessibility, trucks and emergency vehicles, roadway safety, actress transportation users, and traffic congestions are the highest priorities for the corridor in the study area. So as I mentioned, what we've done from this needs assessment is started to identify an inventory of projects. And so our next slides are going to show you what these projects look like. If you could go to, or next slide, and we can just go to the next one as well. Basically, what we've done is created an entire list of projects that we've proposed for this corridor based on the feedback, and we've separated them into different maps based on those 7 different needs that we talked about. So this first one here is our active transportation map. And just so you know, we will be providing these maps to you after this meeting today, along with the PowerPoint, so that you can digest this a little bit more fully on your own time and really dive into the details that are on this map. I know there's a lot of information on here, but in general here, what we're showing is we've included a lot of intersection improvements, as well as full corridor facility improvements for bikes, pedestrians, and equestrian users. The next map is our evacuation map. We understand that this is a major issue for the corridor, and we are working in tandem with the PAED to evaluate evacuation strategies and capacity opportunities for the next event that may occur on this corridor. The next map is our safety map. We know that this is also a hot button issue for the stakeholders in this corridor. On these maps, you'll see various strategies for addressing hotspot locations that we've identified, such as intersections and sharp curves, as well as preventative measures at various other locations in the corridor. And that can include traffic calming, runaway truck ramps, falling rock protection, that sort of strategies. For traffic congestion, we're again working very closely with the PAED team to identify congestion relief needs and potential improvements for the corridor. In addition, all of our improvements will be taking into account the unique fragile and freight commodities that we know are transported along this corridor. And that's what we've heard from feedback from the public, as well as our stakeholders. For utility resilience, we know that this is also a priority. And as Melina mentioned, there is an ongoing pavement rehabilitation project that will be including the micro trenching for fiber optic telecommunication from Lakeside up to the Highland Dye intersection. And that conduit will be installed for the project to allow space for the future deployment of broadband. And then the corridor project, this project will then be proposing to continue that infrastructure further east through Ramona in order to be prepared for future broadband deployment further east of that rehabilitation project. And lastly, we have a wildlife crossings map. This is basically, this is based on the report completed by SDSU in coordination with Sandag back in 2017. And the viability of these crossing locations will be studied by Caltrans before they are finalized for the CMCP. So again, I know a lot of information there. We will be providing those maps to you to fully digest all of the information and all of the projects that have been proposed for the corridor. With that, I want to just thank you for your attention today. And on the screen, in this next slide, we have again a high-level schedule of completing the San Vicente CMCP through the end of this year. And as discussed, the next steps will be for you all to review these maps and provide any feedback. We'll be gathering and evaluating that feedback from you over the next week or so. And then we'll be updating the project inventory and those maps accordingly. So like I said, we'll be distributing these maps later. We would appreciate feedback specifically on those maps by the end of next week, October 8th, if possible. And then we'll be incorporating that feedback into the maps. This last slide here has some project information for you for any kind of feedback that you're interested in providing and contact information for the project.
Thank you, Amy. Member comments, questions? Please raise your hand, turn your camera on.
I don't see any hands raised, Chairwoman Pinto.
Okay, and what about from the public?
I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Thank you very much for that information. And we'll move right along on the agenda to item number 8. And this is going to be presented by Matt Horn. This is an update on the ITTS, the Interregional Tribal Transportation Strategy. And also Mike Connolly, SCTCA consultant, Matt Horton will now brief us on the status of this project. Gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. So good to see everyone again. If we go to the next slide, please. I just want to provide an update as to where we are in the update. We've gone to this group several times in the recent past. So want to give a briefing on where we are, what we've heard to date, and what some of the final next steps are as it relates to this update. Next slide, please. So in our timeline right now, we've done a lot of outreach. We've had a meeting with each of the tribes individually, or have attempted to have a meeting. I believe we had actual interviews covering 13 of the 17 tribes in the area, and have gone through the process of updating everyone's individual project inventory. So that work was completed earlier this spring. Over the summer, we have put a lot of work on the technical update to cost estimates. So as provided previously with the project list, there'll be an individual cost estimate at a very high planning level with each of the individual improvements proposed by the tribes to help inform grant and funding efforts in the future. We are wrapping up our summer phase of the project where we are digitizing all of this information into, again, some usable maps and spreadsheet inventories. And really right now we're honing in on the update to the specific strategies that were identified in the previous ITTS document to really position this group and each of the individual tribes for as much success as possible moving into the future. And as we move forward from this point, we'll be finalizing that document and distributing for this group to review. Next slide, please. So I want to thank everyone who came out for the workshop that we held last month to discuss some of the strategies and what some of the successes and areas to improve are as we move forward. So we wanted to get together with this group, and the next series of slides will talk about some of the things that the workshop participants identified that went well with these 4 strategies over the past 3 years, what potentially could be improved, and some potential draft actions moving forward to round out these 4 strategies and make them more relevant to the conditions as we understand them right now. And I want to pause on this slide for a little bit because these strategy statements I think are very powerful and very important, and really are in many ways the guiding work plan or action plan for this group moving forward. So as a reminder for everyone, strategy number 1 is support partnerships and collaboration. And this group meeting right now really exemplifies how far we've come with supporting partnerships and our ability to collaborate. And as we'll discuss in a bit, I think there's still room for improvement. Strategy number 2 is to coordinate collaborative planning. So this is more particular on actual individual projects. How can tribes and the working group really leave their fingerprints on individual plans and exert meaningful influence on the direction of projects. Strategy number 3 is to support data sharing on tribal transportation related issues. This is really an acknowledgement that data drives much of the decision making at the agency level, and when it comes to bringing outside dollars to bear, or even regional dollars to bear on tribal needs that we know about, making sure that there's data to support what we all know and feel in tribal areas was acknowledged and continues to be an important component of our path forward. And finally, finding those opportunities to bring outside funding to projects, to planning efforts, to construction, to maintenance, to make all of the great plans that we've put together to date and make them a real reality. So if we go to the next slide, please. At the workshop, we went through an exercise, and we're not going to go through the same exercise today, but I promise that all of the participants on this call, as well as each of the individual tribes, will have an opportunity to weigh in on the redlined strategies and actions that resulted from the engagement at the workshop. But actually at the event, we went through a process of ranking the effectiveness of each of the individual actions identified within the ITTS document, had a really robust discussion. Again, I can't thank everyone enough who was in attendance, who helped drive the conversation, had some really good back and forth about what went well and what could continue to be improved. And finally, we've come to some draft recommendations about how to augment these strategies moving forward. There's definitely still room for opportunity to continue to augment those strategies before we publish an updated final draft of the ITTS. Next slide, please. So this is I will say, a highly abbreviated diagnostic of some of the discussion and what we're planning on doing moving forward with each of the individual strategies from a project team. So I promise that this isn't the only feedback that we received, but really the feedback that we wanted to highlight for this group to consider and give a window into some of the thinking of the project team as each of you as individual stakeholders look over our revised strategy document over the next month. But with strategy 1 to support partnerships and collaboration, there was just a really strong recognition of the whole group of how effective the technical working group, this group that's meeting right now, has become to really coordinate and support the partnerships, not only from agencies to tribes, but also amongst tribes themselves. this really does represent a clearinghouse for information and a strategic partnership moving forward, and really does remain the best vehicle for supporting partnerships into the future. I think there was also a really strong recognition that successes have emerged, right, from this technical working group. The identification of funding opportunities. I think there's a presentation even later today from Paula and Hamul of an amazing project that came out of some collaboration and partnership with Caltrans and across tribes. Sandag continues to partner with SCTCA on the economic development strategy and the creation of specific clean energy clusters. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of success stories that have emerged since the original publishing of the first ITTS document. But there is room for improvement, right? I think that there was an acknowledgement of the group that there's a degree of proactive collaboration and partnership that's maybe lacking a bit. Well, the group has gotten effective at responding to opportunities once they're solicited, and once those opportunities emerge, really getting out in front of and anticipating opportunities before they're ever made public is an area where we can potentially improve as a group. And this results in some recommended actions of creating a contact list, just knowing who is the point of contact at the various agencies, whether it be the tribes, Caltrans, local assistance, BIA, FHWA, so that when questions come up about funding opportunities, we know who to call as individual stakeholders. And also a potential recommendation to assign specific members of this group to monitor large projects, whether it be a CMCP or the regional plan, or construction efforts related to PAED projects, and report out to this group just basic fact finding of where individual projects are in their development process, and informing the group of how we strategically might be able to exert some influence. Next slide, please. On strategy number 2, I think we all recognize that the original project inventory, the needs list, is getting shared with agency partners, right? Caltrans in particular has actually referenced in several other documents the tribal needs inventory that was created as part of the previous project. And that is a project list that's getting shared with some of the CMCPs and is being socialized more broadly than this group. So I think that is a really real success story and an example of why it's so important to get on paper the need that has been identified in tribal country. But what could be improved upon? I think that there was some really good and robust discussion as to how should the project inventory and the screening tool live, right? Currently, it's in an Excel format. There's some printable versions of this really long table and some maps that are, debatably easy to read. And the group during the workshop really questioned, is there a better way for that information to be displayed into the future, given the current technologies that are available? And one potential action that emerged is migrating the screening tool itself into more of a web-based interface, something that maybe it's just this group and the members of this group have access to. Could be something that is actually posted on the Sandag website that is primarily used by this group, but is information that is accessible to all agencies, maybe outside groups, or just members of the general public to identify what is specific tribal transportation need that can be quickly used, accessed, various attributes pulled up very quickly, all in a web-based format, rather than finding the 350-page document that was previously published, flipping through that document and actually finding individual projects. Not that I'm saying that we don't all have that document laying by our bedside that we use every night before we go to bed for some light reading, but just finding an easier to use, more user-friendly format for that inventory to live. So that was an example of some outcomes of the strategy 2 discussion. Next slide, please. So strategy 3, as it relates to data sharing, as I mentioned, there are actual projects descriptions, cost estimates, project attributes, and identified stakeholders being shared with other project teams as projects happen, right? So in addition to the tribal consultation that's happening as part of the CMCP, before Verona, before Paula, before San Pasqual ever received outreach from the San Vicente project team, there was actually a database already created of projects that had been identified in that corridor, right? So instead of agency partners playing catch up to identifying what those tribal needs are, those needs are already identified and usable, and conversation can really focus on how to hone that into the specific project, whether it be planning or construction, hone that to current needs instead of just identifying the need in the first place. But in terms of data, what could be improved? I think that there's still some want or desire for more easy to use information, whether it be collision data that's central to so many of our applications, could be demographic information, any of that data that's a real input into planning grants or outside funding opportunities is really difficult to access and really represents a barrier technically for tribes to access outside funding. So contemplating maybe more of a centralized repository for some of that information that is maybe already pre-queried or pre-filtered is something that is the group identified could be of use. In addition to actual data, information about what the grant opportunities are, right? Or potential go-bys for grant language is something that everyone thought would be of real value, not necessarily to compete, but to not reinvent the wheel, right? Where one tribe has success finding an opportunity, what were the components of that grant application that made it so successful, and share those successes so that others within the region can reap the rewards of outside funding sources, all in one easy to use location, some sort of central inventory that this group has access to. So recommended actions are to, really a call for examples or go-bys of grant applications or potential language, whether they be successful applications or not successful applications. So we as a group, when we have an identified opportunity in front of us, have really good basis for what a good application looks like, and reuse that material, adapt it to the specific circumstance at hand, so that we can have additional successes and replicate those funding wins across the region, across tribes. Next slide, please. And finally, strategy number 4, getting those funding opportunities and making them priorities, not only for our local partners, but also our state and federal partners. So there has been funding that has been secured over the last 3 years. I think it would be a really cool exercise to put a dollar value to that, but it's not just planning dollars either. There have been actual capital funding that has happened in certain locations across the region, successes for grant applications, whether it be through the HSIP program or Tribal Transportation Safety Program or other BIA or federal programs. Projects have gotten funded, and real infrastructure has been installed in tribal lands in rural San Diego since the publishing of our previous document. That's a really real success and something that we need to acknowledge. But what could be improved moving forward? Again, I think that there was a degree of conversation around being proactive, right? What can we do to get out in front of opportunities so that we're not responding to a notice of funding opportunity, a week or 2 after it's been published? Instead, we can, as a group, anticipate when HSIP NOFOs are about to be released, or other funding opportunities before they're released, coordinate on a strategy, and instead of submitting funding applications at the 11th hour, really formulate something that may have multiple tribes involved, multiple agency partners involved, developing really good project descriptions so that we're out in front of those opportunities and making sure that we're positioning ourselves for the best possible chance, and making sure that our need is as clearly defined as possible for those funding applications, so that things aren't left to chance or the availability of staff. So recommended actions moving forward, having specific individuals on this team actually tracking the funding opportunities that operate on cycles, making sure that this group knows that that cycle is on the way. And instead of having this working group review open funding opportunities, that this group actually talk about what funding opportunities are going to be open by the time this group meets together next, and focus on who wants to team together and how we as a group can support each other applying for those cycle opportunities. So those are some of the outcomes of the workshop. If we go to the next slide, please. Later today, we'll be sending out an actual revised version of the strategy document. So it has a little bit more narrative related to each of the individual action steps to achieve these strategies, who the responsible parties are, some description of the feedback that we received specifically at the workshop that resulted in the changes that are being proposed. But quite literally, it'll be a redlined version of the strategy portion of the ITTS document, so that this group can see what the previous recommended strategies were and the action items, and what are, as a project team, proposed alterations to that strategy section might be. So each of the individual representatives to the technical working group will receive a redlined version of that document. And we're really encouraging everyone to take a look over that document, and provide any additional feedback that you think would be useful to hone that language and guide this group over the next several years as the ITTS, the strategy, is actually implemented moving forward. Paired with that red line document, we'll also be sending to each individual tribe the project list as it stands, including the cost estimate for each of the individual projects as a result of the interviews that we conducted earlier in this project. There will be specifically called out in that email a new column that is identified associated with each project, which will be project phasing. Something that you may have seen on the earlier slides, but an outcome of the workshop was a recognition that it's important that we as a group know where each of these individual needs is in the planning process. And I'll admit, most of the need is in the ideation phase, right? It's identified anecdotally. There might be some light data backing up the need that's been identified, but really it's in the early phases of project development. But that's not true for all of the projects. Some of them actually have received, in some cases, some limited environmental analysis. There might be some concepts that have been created, whether they be really limited engineering, or some of them might be 30%, 90%, 100% designed in some cases, but lack the final funding for implementation. So you, as representatives of the tribe, were asking to review where we think each of the individual projects is in the project development phase, and provide your feedback on whether we have identified the appropriate phase for that project inventory moving forward, so that if there is an opportunity that requires shovel-ready projects to be eligible, we can quickly filter and identify those projects that are truly shovel-ready. And finally, we'll be updating the entire ITTS document with all of the feedback that we've received, including the community outreach, and we'll be including that in a new ITTS update for 2021 for this group to replace the version that is on their nightstand with a new version moving forward. So with that, I'll stop talking and love to hear any feedback from this group as to how they may be able to provide input, comments, feedback, or questions into the ITTS update. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, can you make sure that, because your audio seems to be fading in and out and we can hear you and then you go away. So can you make sure it's speaking into the microphone. There you are.
Oh no, I am
There you
so
are.
sorry,
Yes,
guys.
there you are. It was
Are
just
you
going in
sure?
and out. Yeah, there you are. Now loud and clear.
Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, guys, about that audio.
Start over.
Yeah, okay. Well, guys, the ITTS update. No. I think the moral of the story, and again, I really apologize for any audio problems, guys. I should have seen the hand get raised in the chat here. I think I see that. We got really great solid feedback from the attendees at the workshop. We're taking all of that feedback, updating the strategies with that feedback, and we will be providing each of you as participants a redlined version of the document to see how we are interpreting that feedback and how you guys think moving forward those strategies should be updated to guide the working group and the individual tribes to pursue those funding opportunities.
Thank you, Matt. Any member comments or questions?
Have some, like always.
Good. Go ahead, Shasta.
So first of all, Matt, we could hear you. You just got a little bit more quiet, but I recommend again, once more, because every time you adjust your head or your ear, you're moving the microphone away from your mouth. So there you go. That's better. And stop making that face. Everything's fine. I wanted to comment mostly, first of all, say thank you for this great overview of all the work. Did somebody just stick their hand in your?
That may have been Amy. She's also in my office.
That's amazing. I want, again, thank you for this. This has been a long time. We go over this and over this. And I just wanted to mention that Paula had worked on a tribal transportation, or I should say a community transportation safety survey. We got a little bit of grant funding from America Walks, and we're able to use that to do a survey. And we even, we use some of the money to get these awesome reflectors that you can like pin to your backpack or your purse or your jacket or whatever with the Paula logo on them, and they're a light. See what? So these are super cool. So this was the swag that we used to incentivize people into taking our survey. And we got a lot of really great responses. And I just wanted to tell the group that what the community had to say was the same as what we have been asking for as projects for Paula from the very beginning. And I will say one of the things that floated to the top was sidewalks. People are very concerned about not being able to walk and feel safe on the sidewalks. And of course, on our two main roads, Paula Temecula and Paula Mission roads, those are county roads. So I'm just throwing that out there so that, Richard and Scott can, bookmark that in their heads that we want sidewalks and a traffic light, because people can't get out of their driveways. But it was just really great to get that community feedback and have it be in line with what we have marked as our priority projects in Paula. So just wanted to share that.
Any other member comments?
I don't see any hands raised. Chairwoman Pinto.
Do you see any members of the public with their hands raised, Ms. Castellanos?
I don't see any hands raised. Chairwoman Pinto.
Okay. Wonderful. Like Shasta said, Matt, we did hear you, but you were a little soft, but thank you very much. We appreciate it. And if there are no other comments or questions, we'll move right along to item number 9, which is the State Route 94 multi-use pathway feasibility study. I've had the pleasure of hearing Madai a couple of occasions give this presentation. Lovely presentation, lovely idea. And this is a project that my tribe has identified in the ITTS and pursued funding from Caltrans through the Sustainable Communities Planning Grants. And the study seeks to investigate the viability of 7 miles of multi-use pathways along State Route 94. And today, Ms. Para from Sandag will now provide us with an update on the study. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to allow us to present an update on this planning feasibility study that we have been working on for quite some time, a little over a year and a half. And I just want to make sure if people can hear me okay, just before I move forward.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please. A little bit of project background. So the planning feasibility study that the project team and myself, so I'll just refer as the project team, we've been working on is basically a 7-mile stretch along State Route 94 in the communities of Jamul and Dulzura and within the County of San Diego. And basically we're looking at the feasibility of a multi-use path and whether or not, this would be feasible with the opportunities and constraints throughout the corridor, given that this is a 7-mile stretch. We are taking a lot of, potential conflicts into consideration as, I will go into a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides. But basically we're looking into these two communities within State Route 94. Next slide, please. So a little bit more, basically the, images before you just show different examples of what a multi-use path can look like. But in essence, a multi-use path is physically separated from vehicle traffic from the roadway. And it's intended for access that is suitable for more than one mode. So multimodal in essence. And this can be used for people who are walking, biking, scooting, rolling, all of these different uses can commingle. And this study is possible today, or was possible, because it was funded by a Caltrans Sustainable Communities Plant application. And next slide, please. Now, some of the study goals, again, these are just terminology that we kept coming back as the project team. We're looking at, opportunities and constraints. Where should the corridor be located? This is along SR 94, but, we'll go into a little bit more detail in terms of the location, north versus south, opportunities and constraints. But in essence, it's identifying what is the most feasible alignment, because if you're familiar with the corridor, and a 7-mile stretch is quite a lot of ground to cover. So we also looked at some key section features, and just to incorporate into, minimizing pedestrian and vehicle, or pedestrian / bike and vehicle conflicts. We also looked at potential bike amenities, or we identified some bike amenities, but this was up to the public to provide some feedback a couple of months ago on what they would like to see into this study and what we're recommending. We also did engage with the community in 2 different phases throughout the study to present, the initial concept analysis, and then we went back once we had, the alignment more or less selected, again, to provide a little bit more input from the community. We also did coordinate with key stakeholders in the area. And next slide, please. Some of the study elements that we have looked at for some time. So we began with project consideration and looking at the scope, refining the scope. Again, just trying to see what is out there, where can we leverage existing, facilities, if there are some, and where are we looking at, a propensity for active transportation users. So this is, a timeline which, the inception of the project from project kickoff to where we're at now, which is, there's quite a lot of, steps that have occurred, which I mentioned briefly, the public outreach phases, there was the concept development and analysis refinement, and, the phase that we're currently at now, which is presenting to stakeholders and different community groups, just an update on, what we have been looking at and basically what that recommendation is going to be in the final document. So the final document will be a blueprint of, should this project get funded and implemented, then this is what we are recommending with, substantial backup. Next slide, please. So project need and benefits, just a continuation, this project was not only, it's possible due to the Caltrans Sustainable Communities Planning Grant, but this segment or this portion of the project is also outlined in other transportation documents in the region, such as the County of San Diego Trails Master Plan and the ITTS, or the Inter-Regional Tribal Transportation Strategy. And essentially, again, this path, or our intention in the recommendation, what we want to accomplish is entice what we like to refer to as the general population. So what does that mean? It's basically, we're planning, anytime we're planning for a bikeway facility, we're doing this so to entice those who are generally interested in biking or walking, but are concerned to do so along vehicles, and rightfully so. Because if there's a family, if there's just, people from a more vulnerable population, if there's no facility, then, there's going to be hesitation. So this study is to account for those who are already traveling along this stretch, and possibly even on the shoulder, which can be dangerous along State Route 94, and just capture new active transportation users. And next slide, please. So here we have sort of a map of, the entire stretch, the 7-mile stretch. And here we're showing how we broke it down into 3 different segments, because it is 7 miles and it is, a substantial segment to be built realistically as, 7 miles continuously as one project. So what the project team is recommending is that this corridor is broken down into 3 separate segments. And then on the westernmost side is segment 1, which with the west terminus from Hamacha and Campo Road, basically where the shopping center is, the Rancho San Diego Shopping Center. There's a lot of propensity there, of course, because we have the shopping center, there's the YMCA. We have a trailhead on the south of SR 94. And then on the east, we have the Steel Canyon High School, and then we go into segment 2, which is, from Steel Canyon Road and then eastbound from Lions Valley Road. Here we do have some, smaller restaurants and commercial uses, but, the properties are smaller in nature than, in the west side. And then finally, the segment 3 is from Lions Valley Road to basically the end of the California Fish and Wildlife Reserve. We do here have mostly single-family residential uses. The topography is more hilly in nature. So it just makes sense to break it down by, each of the segments by a little over, 1.5 miles to 2 miles. And then for each of the segments, we considered a north versus south alignment. Next slide, please. And then, basically this is redundant, but we're inclusive of a multi-use path is inclusive of a multimodal uses, but basically other users that we looked at as part of this study, I've already mentioned, but also equestrian users based on public feedback is, another use that was suggested that this study should look at. We looked at trail cross-section options, including a potential equestrian DG path. However, due to the constraints of this corridor, we're not recommending a DG path adjacent to the multi-use path, but we do believe that a DG path on the opposite side of the multi-use path should be, built at a later time. Next slide, please. And here we just have an example of some of the criterion that was used for the project team to discern which alignment is the preferred alternative, north versus south. So here very quickly, we have some of the categories that were used that are sometimes not visible to the human eye when we see a facility that's already built, but it's very important to take into consideration, such as right-of-way impacts, utility relocations, potential property impacts, environmental, and of course, cost estimate. And then from here, we were able to select the preferred alignment just based on which side would have, minimal impacts. So for segment 1, it would be on the south side, continuing onto segment 2 on the south side, and then finally, as we would cross the street northbound on Lions Valley Road to continue. Next slide, please. So this is one of the example of the cross section. So the multi-use path is going to be, your standard class 1 facility with your 10-foot hard surface paved path. Sorry, that was redundant, just a paved path. And then with 2-foot shoulders on either side, and then where feasible, at least a 2-foot buffer adjacent to the road. On some occasions, we're recommending that this buffer is greater than 2 feet. Next slide, please. And now this is one of the concepts that the project team developed at a key location. So this is at the west terminus or beginning portion, depending on, the origin of the trip. And this is a key location because, high volume of traffic, speeds are prevailing, higher than what's posted on SR 94. So we do have a couple alternatives here, but what's before you is a safe crossing from pedestrians from the north side into the south side, which is the preferred alignment for a multi-use path. And this is currently a dirt path where a lot of people park their vehicles, and there's a trailhead. So we're recommending that this get paved, and there's some utility conflicts, of course, that would have to be either moved or relocated. But in essence, that's where the multi-use path begins. This is where we're leveraging the existing Steel Canyon Bridge to on the lower, northeast side of the location here. So we're leveraging the infrastructure of this bridge for this portion of the segment. Next slide, please. Now moving on to segment number 2, this is a good example of, a concept that we wanted to develop for 2 reasons. So one is, like I said, where possible, we're trying to move the multi-use path further away from the road, just to add, that extra level of buffer and just separation from vehicles. But also, if you've heard me in any meetings, you know that I'm a big proponent of protected intersections. So this is just a good example of, what we're trying to do to minimize those conflicts, and also just to make sure that, people who are on the multi-use path, they are visible from vehicle traffic, whether that is, southbound, making a right turn on Lions Valley Road, or you're just going, traveling eastbound on SR 94. And next slide, please. Now on to segment 3. This is where, again, that continuation of the segment is on the north side, and where it's, again, a little bit more hilly in nature. It can be not the most friendly for people who are biking, scooting, walking, right, on this portion, just because there are a lot of topographical constraints, but there's also a lot of driveway conflicts. So here's another development of the concepts where we show those driveway approaches. Some of them would have to be relocated. There would have to be a lot of right-of-way acquisitions and some utility relocations. Next slide, please. So some of the project amenities that we looked at, and this was again received by the public directly, and this is going in the preferred order. It's lighting, trees, benches, which all make sense, to have some sort of rest area because it's such a long stretch. But also, things like restrooms and parking, bike parking, wayfinding signage, which are also very important, as well as public art opportunities. And next slide, please. So here's the high-level construction estimate based on just the conceptual plan. So remember, this is a planning feasibility study. We're making a recommendation on what we believe based on the public feedback that we received, based on the opportunities and constraints, existing conditions. So this is based on a very conceptual alignment that the project team developed. And it's basically, again, broken down by segments, and we have the total at the bottom based on the total construction per mile, which is pretty much accurate to what we see for a multi-use path, given the constraints of, right-of-way acquisitions and topography retaining walls and everything to that extent. And I think, yeah, so it's all including contingency in here and some escalation. But again, this would probably be, elevated once final design plans are refined. Next slide, please. And this is recapping, the previous community outreach phases that we conducted, which I went over a little bit. I only want to highlight here, we don't have to go through each and every one of them, but I do want to highlight that given, the nature of, we conducted the public outreach, both of these phases, of course, in a virtual manner. And we did receive 350 participants for the first phase and 220 participants for the second phase. So, next slide. So here, this is a propensity map, which again, it makes sense. Basically, the darker colors is where we have the shopping center. We have more destinations, if you will, on the westbound side of the corridor. Nonetheless, we do see, some propensity on, segment, the beginning portion of segment 2, and then towards the end of, segment 3, because like I said, this facility is trying to capture those who are already walking and or biking, scooting alongside SR 94 and providing a safe facility so that people can move throughout this corridor. Next slide, please. So as part of this recommendation, we're also outlining what would be the next steps required should this project get built. We think that it would be a great project. We think that it would be an awesome opportunity for an implementing agency. So we're just, like I said, providing a blueprint, if you will, of what are the next steps. So this includes just, some of the requirements such as funding, which we do outline in the final document, some potential funding opportunities, preliminary engineering. We would of course need environmental clearance, possibly state or also federal, which is NEPA, design and permitting, utility coordination, construction. So there's quite a lot of steps that would have to happen before, a potential project is implemented. And next slide. This is an example of some funding opportunities. Some of these are competitive and or discretionary. And again, it's just an example of some funding opportunities that are out there, but there may be more. And those include, private development. This can be a capital improvement program from the County of San Diego. And there's just a list of some discretionary funding opportunities. And next slide, please. And with that, I conclude the update that I have for the planning feasibility study on SR 94. My information is on the screen, and I'm available if you have any feedback on this project.
Appreciate it, Madai. As you mentioned, it is in the early stages, but I do think it's a really awesome project, and it keeps our people who walk and hike and bike and scoot and horse on Highway 94. It keeps them safe, because around the high school, I always see these kids walking along Highway 94. And the traffic there, is pretty heavy, and people tend to speed through the area. So it does, most importantly, keep our people safe. I appreciate the time and effort that you've put into this, Sandag, and also Caltrans for the funding. It could be a beautiful thing, but like you said, we're in the early stages. I'll open it up for member comments or questions. This is an information item. Are there any hands raised? Ms. Castellanos?
Yes, there is a hand raised for one of our members, and that would be Andrew Orozco.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Appreciate the presentation. A lot of information, obviously. This is a pretty big project, but I just wanted to, acknowledge that this is the type of project, that we're looking at to include in the ITTS, right? I know you guys are working on that. And also, this all stemmed from the Sustainable Communities grant. So I was able to learn today how, it was phased out. Obviously, with it being in Caltrans right away, there's a few more steps, but I'm sure you guys will work through that. So I was just curious on the construction costs. There was a total, I think, of about 55 million for all three segments. Did that include design, or is that construction only?
We can go back to that slide. So it does include mostly construction cost and contingency. So I'm sure if we can, navigate back to it. I don't remember right off the top of my head.
Gotcha.
I believe it's only construction costs. It does include a 30% contingency. So there it is.
Okay. So
General
there's design,
mobilization.
engineering,
Yeah, so it does include design.
right-of-way
Right-of-way
coordination.
acquisitions, which again, I do want to say that this is based on very conceptual plans and/or alignment.
Of course.
We have.
Of course. And then it looks like the only thing that maybe not included in there is environmental. So just kind of curious to see how those costs were broken down on a project like this. So is the next step to go for design, engineering, and environmental dollars? Is that the next step?
Certainly. So the next step, as far as, this study is making that recommendation, and as part of the recommendation, yes, it would be up to an implementing agency, whoever that might be. It can be a partnership. So we don't go into that level of detail in the final report, just because, there's endless opportunities of how this can potentially get funded and designed, ultimately implemented. So the next step, should an implementing agency be interested in, following this recommendation, is, seek out funding, look at, preliminary planning as well. So the planning phase would have to continue. And I think that's also in one of the slides, but then we would have to do environmental clearance, and then engineering or preliminary engineering.
Right. Okay. And this may be a question for Raphael. Would this feasibility study get this project into the SHOP program, or what else would be needed to be eligible?
I wouldn't be able to answer that right now, but I will follow up and get back to you, or back to the whole team.
And the multi-use path is a part of it's identified in the county's trails master plan, correct? So how does that play into it? I don't know if anyone from the county can speak to that.
Hi, Jane. I believe it is in the county's trails master plan, and the county would be willing to, absolutely to work with Caltrans and Sandag to get that pathway. From my understanding, the community is very interested in the pathway too.
Great. So Richard, in that case, or even Raphael, where it's in the Caltrans right of way in some portions, and obviously within the county, could the tribe leverage, in-house capabilities like your engineers to participate in that, on that end of it, rather than a consultant, or would it strictly be in a review capacity?
So you're asking if Caltrans would be, I guess, delivering the project, like doing the.
Not necessarily delivering, but more in a partnership whereby maybe Caltrans and county collaborate with your guys' engineering team to help, facilitate that part of the project rather than consulting it out.
Yeah, I think either way is possible. I honestly don't know how a project gets handed to a consultant versus to in-house, other than I think mainly due to if just the resources aren't there to work on the project, then there are consultants on call that are ready to take on these projects when Caltrans doesn't have the resources for them.
Gotcha.
But yeah, let me I can find out about that too, and get an answer back.
Hi,
Okay,
Andrew,
great.
thanks. And this is Scott Crispin over at the county, the interim tribal liaison. So yeah, I think this is a great conversation. Maybe we can have a follow-up to see what kind of partnerships we could form. I was already, as we were talking about this, getting in touch with our Department of Parks and Rec that oversees the Master Trails Plan, just to make sure that they were aware of the work that Sandag's doing, so that we could continue that collaboration. But I think that's a great idea. Maybe we can have a discussion over the next couple of months about the right way to bring this project forward.
And Madai, the county has been on the project development team, correct?
Correct. And I was also going to chime in. So the county has been on our monthly reoccurring project development teams. And more specifically, blanking on the name, I can look it up in a second, but we've also involved the team from the Parks and Rec department. So they've provided feedback and they are aware of this project.
Great.
Okay.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other member comments? We can go to public comments. Any public comments on this?
I don't see any hands raised for members or public. Chairwoman Pinto.
Thank you, Ms. Castellanos. So then, seeing none and hearing none, we'll move on to the final item on the agenda, which is our good friend Shasta. Last but not least, the Tribal Transportation and Climate Adaptation Planning. As was mentioned at the last meeting, Paula Band of Mission Indians, in partnership with Humul Indian Village, was awarded a Caltrans Sustainable Communities Planning Grant in 2019 to develop a climate-focused tribal transportation adaptation plan. And Shasta of Paula will provide an overview of the project. Please, Shasta, the floor is yours. Love the hair, by the way.
Thank you very much. And I see that my slides are being provided for me. Is that right? Instead of being able to control them myself? Okay, fine.
Correct.
Fine. Thank you. As Chairwoman Pinto mentioned, she gave the overview of the project, and it was a delight to be able to work and continue to work with Humul on developing a climate adaptation plan that takes tribal transportation needs into account. Next. So primarily what I wanted to do today, and I'm going to make this brief because it's almost lunchtime and stomachs are growling, is to tell you what we did so that other tribes can consider the opportunity to develop their own transportation sections to their adaptation plans, or even an entirely separate tribal transportation adaptation plan that relates to climate change. So we did this very similarly to what you would do for a general climate change vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan, but we looked at the transportation resources, both in Paula and in Humul, and also accounted for the differences between the needs of the two different communities, especially in terms of the number of roads and things that are occurring within the reservation versus in access into and out of the reservations. And we were very fortunate to work with a great consultant team from Prosper Sustainably, and also with Kimley Horn. We worked specifically with Juliana Cuomo and Tammy Moreno, and they were great. Next. So again, this was the overview of who was involved. And then we had a significant role for the members of the community and also for our tribal elected officials to help us gather the information that we needed to make the assessments of our transportation climate vulnerabilities, and then pull it all together in an analysis so that we could develop some adaptation strategies that were climate and transportation focused. Next. So for the vulnerability assessment, I mentioned during one of the last presentations that we did community outreach and we got a whole lot of feedback in general on safety, and that was actually a separate project. But what we're finding is that our outreach ends up developing or coming up with a lot of the same problems that people see. Just the difference here is that we wanted people to let us know if they were connecting the climate changes that we're seeing with transportation access and transportation problems so that we could include those, the community's concerns in our vulnerability assessment, and then develop that into our adaptation plan. And we are now at phase 3, which is the intertribal and interagency collaboration and capacity building, which is a fancy way of saying I get to come to groups like this and say, hey, check out what we did. And now I get to put it in my grant report and say I did what I was paid to do. So, but I also, of course, want to share because I want people to learn from what we did. Next. Uh-oh, did we freeze? Oh, there we go. Okay, so these next several slides, which I will go through relatively quickly, will show some examples of what we did. And so I'll focus on Paula since that's what I'm responsible for. But we began with Kimberly Horn's help by developing a critical transportation asset map. And so that's what you're seeing here for Paula, with all sorts of tribal roads and different icons used to identify our most critical assets. And for transportation, what is the point of transportation? It's to get from one place to another. So it's not just the roads themselves, it's the places that we're trying to reach or flee from in the case of, an evacuation when it comes to developing a transportation plan. So that's what this basic map is. Let's look at all of our critical transportation. And I will note that this does not include residences. This is all about the tribal administration and departments and economic development. Next. And what we're looking for in this is what are the impacts of climate change on these transportation corridors and our roads and other assets in Paula and Hamul. So when you look at climate change broadly, and I won't get too much into climate change, I hope I don't have to explain it to folks, but you have 5 major exposures that people are, or that communities are exposed to. And for Paula and Hamul, we ticked the boxes for 4 out of 5, which is temperature extremes. For us, that's usually extreme heat, wildfire, storms and flooding, and drought. We did not check the box for melting ice and sea level rise, although I guess we'll see how far inland the Pacific Ocean comes when the ice caps are all gone. So those are the things we focused on. And you might think, what exactly are these things going to do to our transportation infrastructure? Well, I'm going to tell you next. So temperature extremes, this is what we're seeing in terms of what's happening in Paula as a data point within San Diego County, that we have these increased projections of 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit that's already occurred between 1895 and 2016, and then up to a 7.3 degrees Fahrenheit increase by the end of this century. So that is really extreme. And for San Diego County, we're seeing that it's maybe going to be an average temperature change of 5 to 6 degrees in the winter and 5 to 10 degree increase in the summer. And we know from what we've seen in other places around the world that have had extreme heat events that heat can actually melt pavement. Heat can make it so that planes can't take off and land because their tires will melt on contact with the runway. So that's one of the potential effects of temperature extremes. Next. Drought, the thing with drought that we're looking at as far as our roads are concerned, it has more to do with dust than it has to do with the lack of water, because we know that when things are arid, they get dustier. So when you have a lot of dirt roads, as we have in Paula, or the other thing too is that drought combined with extreme heat events can raise the levels of ground level ozone, and that contributes to health problems like asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, can all be exacerbated by drought and heat conditions. When people are driving in those conditions, they are adding pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions to that mix, and it becomes even more volatile. And as far as the dust is concerned, dust and heat, again, combined can create public health issues. So when you've got a lot of people driving up and down the dirt road to your house and creating a lot of dust in drought conditions, that is a transportation issue because it ends up having an impact on community health. Next. Storms and flooding, which is always a little bit weird to follow drought because we think we're not worried about storms and flooding here. We're worried about a lack of water. But what we've learned is that because of the extreme drought and the high temperatures, it ends up baking the ground to make it so hard that when storms do come, it's harder for the water to absorb into the soil or into the dirt, into the ground, wherever. And so you end up having worse flood issues because there's more standing water on top of that hard packed clay or soil that's been affected by drought. So what we've seen in Paula is that we have, even just in a sort of a normal rainstorm, we're having flooding issues on our roads, and people are getting trapped in their neighborhoods or in their individual houses because they can't pass through our roads that are covered with floodwaters. And the floodwaters may recede relatively quickly, but it's still a very unsafe condition that we need to plan for. Next. So this is our storms and flooding map, which is something we focus on a lot because even though it doesn't happen very frequently, when it does happen, it's a really big deal. So we focused in on our major infrastructure, and that's what you're seeing in this map, and also including our demographics for the general area. And this again was thanks to Kimberly Horn, so that we could make some decisions about what we are going to do in drought situations when roads are impassable or when there are rock and mudslides on the main access points into and out of Paula, which would be 76 going both west and east, and then Paula Temecula Road going north. And that's a vulnerability. I would love to say that our adaptation plan has a solution, but we can't implement those solutions without the help of the county and Caltrans. Next. Wildfire, I'm not going to go into this in detail. We all know what it is to fear wildfire, and our concern from a transportation and climate standpoint are two: one, increases in wildfire, and two, wildfire blocking access, not only for evacuation routes, but also for ingress for vehicles and firefighting equipment that need to come in and help fight that fire. So that is a significant vulnerability that we identified. Next. And this is just our map, very similar to the flooding map, showing the areas of primary concern that we want to address in our climate and transportation plan. Next. And I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of our risk levels. And I already mentioned that these four exposures, we have a high risk, but over on the right here, this is a snapshot of one of our survey questions about how concerned people in Paula are about climate change exposures. You can see that for storms and flooding and wildfires, those are very high. Temperature extremes, not as much, and drought, not as much. Honestly, I would have put drought at the top of my personal list, but that's because I'm the environmental director and I know how bad it is. But nonetheless, it's good to get a snapshot of what the community understands, because you can also help them understand that the things they put as not as high of a priority, you can scare them and tell them why they should put those as high priorities too. I don't really want to scare people, but you know what I mean. People need to be concerned about these things as well. Next. And then our vulnerability evaluation criteria. This is a list of potential impacts from climate change. And we asked the community members to put these in order from most concerned to least concerned, and then also to add things that we hadn't thought of. And so we got some good feedback on that in terms of being able to decide what's the biggest things that we should be focusing on in our adaptation plan. Next. And again, this is just an infrastructure focus area, which we already looked at, so we can move to the next. Flood risk, and I'm showing these just to show that these are the kind of maps that you can develop to help with your community outreach so that people can see the areas that are of most concern that the project team has identified, but we also gave them the opportunity to put their own pins in these maps and say, well, this is where I experienced flooding, or this is where I couldn't cross the road. So things that I might not have noticed because I don't live in those parts of Paula or work in those parts of Paula, we had the community let us know, I can't get in and out of my house when it floods, so I'm going to put a pin in the map, and that's something you can help us address. Next. Our fire history, and now this map is out of date because we had a fire on the western side of Gregory Mountain a few months ago, and so we need to add that to the map. But again, that's wildfire is one of our biggest fears. Next. That's it. I got through that really quickly with 1 minute to spare. But again, just illustrative of what we are doing. If any of you are interested in doing your own climate and transportation project, I'd be delighted to talk to you about what we did. And so here's my contact information. Just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Shasta. Excellent. Any member comments? Questions?
Yes, we have a member comment from Rafael Reyes.
Go ahead, Rafael.
Yeah, actually, sorry, I just wanted to ask for a few minutes to pitch our the Clean California grant for local agencies, separate from the effort we're doing on the state facilities. But I can do that at the end. I just wanted to ask for that time.
Okay. Any member comments on item 10? If not, then any public comments or questions on item 10? I have begun cooking my spaghetti right now, so don't mind me.
There are no hands raised for the public comments.
I'm on my way. I'll be there in an hour for spaghetti.
Come on down. Come on down. Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Shasta. It is concerning because, you know, the climate is changing and all these things are affecting us, and you just always put things in perspective for us. But thank you. I appreciate it. Rafael, did you want to say something?
Yes, please. So I'm going to put a couple links in the chat. The first one is for the website for the Clean California grant. And this is open to any local agency, tribal government for doing beautification work. And so there's several other criteria that they're trying to address with this grant. The link will take you to the homepage of the grant, and then there's a couple examples of some murals and painting actually on the underside of freeway structures, just as an example of what can be done as part of this grant. And don't limit it to just this. You know, I think there's a lot of leeway here for innovative ideas on how the rural areas can be, you know, beautified or enhanced. And there's the next link I'm gonna input is the recording of a online workshop that was held a few weeks ago. The next one is coming up on October 7th from 10 to 12, and I'll also send the registration link following that. So please take a look at those links that I'm going to put in the chat. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Those are beautiful murals, by the way. I'm checking out the link, cooking and then doing everything at once. So I'll stop and focus again. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Rafael. Okay, well, if there's no questions for Rafael on this, or we'll choose our next quarterly meeting in December. Any suggestions for the next meeting? Date, location? I see December 15th or December 22nd. Not sure if you want to meet on December 29th. Any suggestions from the members, or I could choose a date right now, maybe the 15th or the 22nd?
Yeah, maybe maybe earlier in December, like the 8th. The regional plan is gonna go to the board on the 10th. So I'm just wondering, what are some thoughts on how far into December? Would the 8th work?
The 8th doesn't work for me, Jane. I have a
Okay.
board meeting at my.
Okay, and the 1st?
December 1st does work. Does December 1st work for the committee members?
I'd rather do the 15th personally,
Okay.
but I'm just being difficult.
No, I'm with you too.
Okay. All right, December 15th?
December 9th, December 15th.
December 15th. Okay, and are we thinking that it may be in person? Would be nice.
It would be nice, but
should we have it plan A and plan B?
I think, with the way that the flu season and all that, I think we should just end the year on a Zoom. Plus I get to cook and talk at the same time.
Okay, all right, December, and the same time, 10 to 12?
10 to 12 is perfect.
All right. So noted.
Okay, any member comments, final member comments or public comments? Do you see any hands raised? Ms. Castellanos?
I don't see any.
Okay. Well, on that, we'll end on thanking everybody for being here and taking the time and for the information today. Eat something good, nourish your bodies, take care of yourselves. I know, as Mike said in his prayer this morning, there's been a lot of death in the community. So, be thinking good thoughts about each other and hug your elders, watch out for your people. And I'll see you guys December 15th. Okay? Eat something good. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you.
Pinto.
Thank you,
Bye, everyone.
Chairwoman Pinto.